The cleaner thought she was alone. The boss saw everything, and what happened next shocked everyone. During her shift, she walked into the room and froze when she saw stacks of money intentionally left on the table. Alone, she looked around, took a deep breath, and acted unaware she was being watched by hidden cameras. The boss watched everything in silence, but at the end of the day, he entered the room, finding her pale, frightened, unsure of what was coming. The next morning, he called a meeting with the entire staff. What he announced there destroyed reputations, overturned contracts, and put her name in the newspapers. The mansion on the Upper East Side stood imposingly behind the high walls that separated it from the constant motion of New York City. Inside, every room breathed a quiet luxury. Italian marble on the floors, Austrian chandeliers hanging from the ornate ceilings, works of art that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. But for Arthur Vance, that space was merely an extension of his calculated solitude. A man nearing 45, with always impeccable graying hair, bespoke suits, and a watch that cost as much as an apartment. To the world, he was the successful entrepreneur, owner, of one of the largest construction firms in the state. But inside, Arthur was a desert of mistrust. He didn't believe in people. He believed in contracts, in clauses, in legal guarantees. Life had taught him that trust was a luxury for fools. In his early 20s, when he still dreamed of true partnerships, he was betrayed by a partner who emptied their first company's accounts and disappeared, leaving only debts and lawsuits. Then a marriage that lasted 3 years, just long enough to discover that his ex-wife was carrying on a parallel relationship with their own family lawyer. Each disappointment was a layer of cynicism that settled upon his soul, hardening it like fresh concrete, drying in the sun. Over time, Arthur developed his own methods of protection, methods no one knew about, which he applied silently, almost like a scientific experiment on human nature. And his favorite test involved money, $50 and $100 bills seemingly forgotten in strategic places around the house, on top of the living room sideboard, next to the crystal vase, on the kitchen counter as if they had fallen from a pocket, on the nightstand in the guest room folded carelessly, and cameras, everywhere discreet, embedded in decorative objects, capturing every angle, every movement, every expression of those who entered that house. It was an ordinary Tuesday in April when Sarah Clark first passed through the electronic gate of that mansion. She had been sent by the outsourced cleaning company that provided services for the residents, replacing an employee who had resigned. Sarah was 32, but her eyes carried a greater age, that premature maturity of someone who had to grow up too fast. Her small frame moved with efficiency, unhurried yet without wasted motion, like someone who had learned to optimize every minute of the day because time was always in short supply. That morning, she had woken up at 5, made breakfast for her 2 sons, left everything organized for the neighbor who would look after them during the day, and even stopped by the hospital to drop off a packed lunch for her mother, who was admitted with pneumonia. She took 2 buses to get to the Upper East Side, the second one late as always, causing her to arrive 15 minutes behind schedule. She apologized as soon as she walked in, but the company supervisor just waved a hand, handed her the keys, and left. Sarah was alone. The first thing she felt upon entering was the silence, a different kind of silence from her home in the Bronx, where there were always neighbors talking loudly, children playing in the street, the sound of the train passing in the distance. Here the silence had weight, it had texture. It was a silence that cost a lot of money. She walked through the enormous rooms, observing every detail, mentally planning the sequence of her cleaning. Living room, dining room, kitchen, 3-bedroom suites, an office, a library. There were so many square feet that her entire apartment could fit into the main living room alone. It was when she was getting the cleaning supplies from the utility closet that she saw it for the first time. 2 $50 bills, folded carelessly, tossed onto the marble kitchen counter. Sarah's heart gave an involuntary leap. $100. That meant a whole week's groceries. It meant her mother's medication that the community clinic was out of. It meant not having to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying the school supplies her older son needed. She stood there, just looking. Her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't an abstract temptation. It was a concrete, palpable, paper temptation. In that moment, Sarah felt the weight of every choice she had ever made in her life. She remembered her adolescence, cut short at 17 when she became pregnant with her first son, the children's father, who promised to stay but left when the second was born, leaving only a street name and broken promises. The sleepless nights doing extra sewing work to supplement her income, the times she ate little so her sons could eat more, but she also remembered something else. She remembered her mother's face, Eleanor, a woman who had worked her entire life as a housekeeper and always said that dignity was the only true inheritance she could leave. She remembered the eyes of her sons, Gabriel, 8, and Lucas, 5, who still looked at her as if she were the greatest hero in the world, and she remembered herself, the silent promise she had made one day, that she would never be the kind of person who had to lower her head in shame before her own reflection in the mirror. Sarah pulled her phone from her apron pocket. Her hands were still shaking, but now for a different reason. She photographed the bills exactly as they were, the angle, the position, even the fold in the paper. She sent the photo to her older sister, Julia, with a quick message. "Found this at the new house. I'll let the owner know at the end of the day." She put her phone away and continued her work, without touching the bills, without even bringing her hand near them as she cleaned around them. What Sarah didn't know was that every second of that moment was being recorded, and that Arthur Vance was watching everything, hidden in his second-floor office through a tablet connected to the camera system. He had come home early, an unexpected change in his schedule, and decided to watch the test live for the first time, instead of just reviewing the recordings later. Arthur expected to see what he always saw: the hesitation, the look to the sides, the hand reaching out, the bill disappearing into a pocket, or at best, the person pretending not to see and simply ignoring it, that calculated indifference of someone who knows there are cameras but doesn't know where. What he didn't expect was this: the photograph, the message sent, the clear decision to report it at the end of her shift, and especially the expression on her face. It wasn't fear of being caught. It was something different. It was a kind of internal resolution, as if she were having a conversation with herself and reaching a conclusion. He continued to watch as Sarah worked. He noticed the meticulous way she cleaned each room, the care she took when handling expensive objects, the attention to detail. But more than that, he noticed something in her posture, a quiet dignity that needed no audience. She didn't work any differently, knowing she was alone. She didn't slacken her pace, didn't cut corners. She just did what needed to be done, the way she believed was right. At 4 in the afternoon, Arthur came down to the main living room. Sarah was finishing up, putting away the last of the cleaning supplies. Seeing him, she was slightly startled, not expecting anyone to be home. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice firm but respectful. "I didn't know you were here, sir. I'm just finishing up." "Good afternoon," Arthur replied, maintaining the neutral tone he used with everyone. "Are you new with the company?" "Yes, sir, I started today. My name is Sarah Clark." "And how was your first day?" Sarah hesitated for a second. This was it. "It was good, sir. The house is large, but I managed to get everything done. I just need to let you know about one thing." "Go ahead." "I found some money in the kitchen, 2 $50 bills. I don't know if you forgot it there, but I thought it was best to let you know. It's all in the same place. I haven't touched it." Arthur was silent, for a moment that seemed to stretch on. He studied her face, searching for signs of falsehood, of theatrics, of a calculated performance, but all he saw was an uncomfortable sincerity, as if she herself found the communication obvious and didn't understand why he was taking so long to respond. "Thank you for letting me know," he said finally. "You can just leave it there. I'll put it away later." Sarah nodded, picked up her bag, and said goodbye. When the door closed behind her, Arthur stood there in the empty living room. For the first time in many years, he felt something he couldn't immediately name. It wasn't exactly surprise, because he was fully aware that honesty existed in the world. He just believed it was rare or conditional. What he felt was something closer to shame. Shame for himself, for the test, for the automated suspicion that had become his way of seeing people. He went up to his office and reviewed the entire recording, from the moment Sarah entered until the moment she left. He saw the photograph being taken again, the message being sent, the care not to disturb the bills. And he also saw something else he hadn't noticed before. He saw the moment she looked at that money with eyes that clearly needed it, eyes that knew the weight of necessity. And yet, she chose something else. She chose to protect not herself, but the integrity of another, even if that other was a complete stranger who might easily never have known the difference. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep well. He kept replaying the scene in his head, analyzing every detail, and he began to ask himself questions he hadn't allowed himself to ask for a long time. What made someone act like that? Was it upbringing? Was it fear of consequences? Was it something deeper, a moral framework that functioned even in the absence of surveillance? And most importantly, what had he himself become by creating tests like that, by assuming everyone would fail, by building an entire life based on the certainty of others' dishonesty? The following week, Arthur called the cleaning company and made a specific request. He wanted Sarah to come back, not just once, but regularly, twice a week. The receptionist found it odd, as clients didn't usually choose specific employees, but she agreed. Sarah also found it strange when she received the schedule, but she needed the money, and 2 fixed days were better than the constant rotation between various houses. In the first few weeks, Arthur made excuses to be home on the days she came. He told himself it was a coincidence, that he had work to do in his home office, that he needed to receive deliveries, but the truth was he wanted to observe. Not with the cameras this time, but in person, trying to understand who this person was, who had disturbed his certainties. He began to notice small details. The way Sarah organized the rooms wasn't just functional, it had a subtle aesthetic, as if she paid attention to the balance of things. The books in the library were slightly more accessible after she cleaned there. The plants on the terrace seemed more vibrant, and he discovered she was watering them even without being asked. Once he found a note on the kitchen table. "Mr. Vance, the refrigerator was making a strange noise. It might be a good idea to have someone look at it." She cared. It was on a May afternoon that the first real dialogue between them happened. Arthur was on the terrace drinking coffee when Sarah passed by carrying a heavy bucket. He noticed she was limping slightly. "Did something happen?" he asked, surprising himself with the genuine concern in his voice. Sarah stopped, as if she too was surprised by the question. "No, sir. It's just a little pain in my foot, nothing serious." "You should see a doctor." "I'll go to the clinic as soon as I have some time," she replied with a tired half-smile. "But the clinic is always crowded, and I have to take my mum there every week, so I keep putting it off." "Your mother is ill?" Sarah hesitated. She didn't normally talk about her personal life at work, but there was something in the way he asked, without morbid curiosity, just simple human interest. "She has respiratory problems, nothing too serious, but she needs follow-up care, and the treatment is through the public health system, so it's a constant rush of lines, waits, and rescheduled appointments." Arthur nodded, saying nothing more at that moment, but that night he did something he hadn't done in years. He researched. Not in an invasive way, he didn't hire private investigators or violate her privacy. He just looked for public information, open social media profiles, basic records, and he found fragments of Sarah Clark's life. He saw photos of her 2 sons, Gabriel and Lucas, always smiling even in simple pictures taken at home. He saw old posts about courses she had tried to take, but couldn't finish due to lack of time. He saw check-ins at public hospitals, at community health clinics, at schools in the Bronx. He also saw a photo from years ago, a younger Sarah wearing a high school graduation gown, diploma in hand, a huge smile with a caption saying she was the first in her family to finish school. And he saw her mother's comment on that photo, "My pride and joy. You're going to go far, my daughter." Arthur closed his laptop and sat in the darkness of his office. He had enough money to buy anything, to solve any material problem. But this woman who cleaned his house twice a week had something he couldn't buy or even name. She had a quiet strength, an integrity that worked even when no one was watching, a capacity to choose what was right even when what was wrong, was easier and more profitable. And for the first time in a long time, Arthur Vance felt envy. Not envy of possessions, of status, of success. He felt envy of character. And along with the envy, he felt something even more uncomfortable, a genuine desire for change. Not a cosmetic change, not an image makeover, but a real, profound change, the kind that requires looking at your own reflection and not liking what you see. The following days were strange for both of them. Sarah noticed that her employer was more present, more communicative. He would ask about her day, about her sons, about little things. Nothing invasive, but there was a genuine attention that left her slightly disconcerted. She wasn't used to being seen as a person in her workplaces. Usually she was just the cleaning lady, invisible, silent, efficient. Arthur, for his part, was fighting an internal battle. Every conversation with Sarah was a mirror reflecting his own life choices. She spoke with affection about her children, even on difficult days. She recounted small victories with genuine joy, like when Gabriel got a good grade in math or when Lucas learned to tie his own shoes. And she also spoke of challenges without self-pity, just as facts of life that needed to be faced. One day Arthur made a decision. He called the cleaning company and made a proposal. He wanted to hire Sarah directly, with a formal contract, a better salary and benefits. The company wasn't happy. Losing a good employee was never positive, but they couldn't stop him. When they informed Sarah, she was in shock. A steady job, on the payroll, without the instability of temporary contracts. But Sarah was cautious. She asked for time to think. She talked to her sister Julia, who was immediately suspicious. "Sarah, this isn't normal. Rich bosses don't just hire you directly like that. Something's wrong." The suspicion was understandable. They had grown up learning that nothing was free, that there was always a hidden motive, especially when you came from where they came from and had to climb walls as high as those on the Upper East Side. Sarah returned to the mansion the next day with a prepared answer. She found Arthur in the living room, working on his laptop. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice firm despite her nervousness, "I really appreciate the offer of a permanent job. But I need to understand why. I just clean the house. I do my job well, but I don't understand why you want to hire me directly like this." Arthur closed his laptop and looked at her. It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Because you taught me something," he said simply. "The first day you came here, I had money scattered around the house. It was a test. A stupid test I used to do with everyone who came in here. And you passed without even knowing you were being tested. You didn't just pass, you did more than that. You protected something that wasn't even yours. And that made me realize how cynical, suspicious, and closed off I had become. You've been working here for weeks, and I've never seen your integrity fail, not once. And I want to learn that. I want to have that back in my life." Sarah was silent for a long moment. It was not the answer she expected. She expected interest, veiled harassment, ulterior motives. She did not expect raw vulnerability. "I just did what was right," she said finally. "It's not heroism, it's just not stealing. To you, it seems that simple. But for many people it's not. And for me, for a long time, it had stopped being." Sarah accepted the job. But she made sure to establish clear boundaries, defined hours, specific duties. She didn't want any confusion, no grey areas. Arthur agreed to everything, respecting every limit she set. And so a new routine began. A routine that, without either of them realizing it yet, was planting the seeds of something much bigger than a simple domestic job. The first few months of permanent employment brought a stability Sarah hadn't known in years. Being on the payroll meant not just security, but official dignity. It meant being able to open a bank account, get store credit, plan more than a week ahead. The boys noticed the change. Gabriel stopped asking if they would have to move again. Lucas started sleeping through the night again, without the nightmares he had when his mother came home too exhausted to hide her worry. Sarah established a precise routine. She arrived at 8 in the morning, organized the house with her usual efficiency, prepared a few meals for Arthur to heat up later, and left at 5 in the afternoon. Nothing beyond what was agreed, but it was impossible not to notice the subtle changes in the house itself. Arthur was present more often. Not in a supervisory sense, but in inhabiting the space differently. He started having breakfast on the terrace instead of in his office. He stopped always eating lunch out. Sometimes he would sit reading in the living room while she cleaned, and every now and then they would exchange a few words. Small talk at first, about the weather, about news in the paper, about a book he was reading. But gradually, the conversations grew, deeper. Sarah discovered that Arthur was an engineer by training, that he had built his construction empire almost single-handedly after losing everything as a young man. She discovered he had no close family. His parents were deceased, no siblings, no children. She also discovered he was a terrible cook, that he worked too much, that sometimes he spent entire nights in his office reviewing projects. Arthur, in turn, began to uncover the layers of Sarah's life, the deferred dreams of studying education in college, her natural talent for dealing with children, which she exercised not only with her sons, but also with her nephews and the neighborhood kids. The incredible strength it took to keep everything running on a little more than minimum wage, juggling bills like a professional. And he also discovered the constant fear, that fear that lives in the chest of those who are always on the edge, where any unforeseen event can mean catastrophe. It was on a day of heavy rain in June that things truly began to change. Sarah arrived soaked. The bus had broken down midway, and she had to walk 4 blocks in the downpour. Arthur saw her come in dripping water, shivering. From the cold, trying to hide it. "Sarah, for God's sake, you're freezing. Go take a hot shower. There are towels in the downstairs suite bathroom." "No need, Mr. Vance. I'll just dry off a bit and start working." "Sarah, I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Go take a shower before you catch pneumonia." She hesitated, but the cold was truly unbearable. She went. When she came back, her clothes still damp but at least warm, she found Arthur in the kitchen making tea. "Sit here and drink this," he said, pushing the steaming cup toward her. "And you're not working in this rain today. I'm calling a car to take you home." "Mr. Vance, I can't do that. I can't get paid without working." "You will work. You'll sit here, drink this tea, warm up, and if the rain stops, you'll do what you have time for. If it doesn't, you'll go home anyway. The day is paid for." Sarah didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to care that didn't come from her own family. She drank the tea in silence, feeling the warmth spread through her body. Arthur stayed there, not exactly talking, just present, as if he wanted to make sure she was okay. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Doing what?" "Being kind, caring. Most employers don't even know the names of the people who work in their homes." Arthur was silent for a moment. "Because I realized I've spent years treating people like they were machines or threats, and that turned me into something I don't like. You showed me it's possible to be different. That integrity isn't weakness, that kindness isn't naivety, and I'm trying to learn." Sarah looked at him with an expression Arthur couldn't quite decipher. There was gratitude there, but also something like apprehension. "You know I'm just the employee, right?" she said softly. "I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't want you to get things confused." "I'm not confused. You work here, and I respect that. But that doesn't mean I can't treat you with basic humanity. One thing doesn't cancel out the other." The rain continued heavily all day. Sarah did what she could, but Arthur insisted she leave early, calling a car service to take her. When she got out on her street, the neighbors looked on with curiosity at the imported car, stopping there. Julia, her sister, was waiting at the door looking after the boys. "Sarah, what's this about a car and driver?" she asked as soon as they were inside. "My boss sent it. It was raining too hard." Julia frowned. "Sarah, I've told you, this isn't normal. Rich people don't do this out of kindness. He wants something." "Julia, stop. He's not like that. He's just a lonely person trying to be less bitter. You're getting too close. This is going to cause problems." Sarah didn't answer, but her sister's words echoed in her mind. Was she really confusing things? Was there something there beyond a professional relationship? And if there was, what exactly was it? Meanwhile, in the mansion on the Upper East Side, other tensions were brewing. Arnold, the groundskeeper who had worked for Arthur for 15 years, was not happy with the changes. He had always held a position of trust, managing the practical affairs of the house, hiring and firing general service staff, holding the keys to everything. But ever since Sarah had been hired directly, he felt his territory being invaded. At first it was just subtle comments. "You're spoiling the new girl, sir," he'd say as if offhandedly. "Employees need to know their place." Arthur ignored him, but Arnold persisted. He started creating small obstacles. He would forget to inform Sarah of changes in the routine. He would leave cleaning supplies unstocked and then imply she wasn't keeping up with her work. He made comments to the other service providers who frequented the house, planting doubts about her competence. Sarah noticed but chose to ignore it. She had dealt with worse in her life. But one day the situation escalated. Arthur had a collection of antique pens, some worth a lot of money, kept in a display case in his office. One of them, a rare Mont Blanc, disappeared. Arnold was the one who reported it missing, with a studied expression of concern. "Mr. Vance, I didn't want to have to say this, but I noticed one of the pens is missing from the display case. The blue Mont Blanc, I saw it there last week. Are you sure?" "Absolutely. And look, I don't like to make insinuations, but Sarah is the only person who goes into the office to clean." Arthur felt his stomach clench. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't believe it. But doubt, that old companion of so many years, began to whisper. What if Arnold was right? What if all this time he had only seen what he wanted to see? What if Sarah was just an exceptionally good actress? He spent a sleepless night reviewing recordings from the cameras he still kept in the office, though he had never told Sarah about them. He spent hours fast-forwarding and rewinding the footage. And then he saw it. He saw Arnold entering the office the previous day when he knew Sarah had already left. He saw him open the display case, take the pen and put it in his pocket. He saw the small, satisfied smile on his face. The anger Arthur felt was different from any previous anger. It wasn't just about the pen, which he could easily replace. It was about the deliberate malice, the calculated attempt to destroy the reputation of someone who had done nothing but work with dignity. The next day, he called Arnold in for a talk. "Arnold, you've worked here for 15 years. I've always trusted you. So I'm going to give you one chance to tell me the truth. Where is the pen?" Arnold maintained a neutral expression. "I don't know, Mr. Vance. I already told you I think it was Sarah." Arthur turned on the tablet and showed him the recording. Arnold turned pale. "You're fired. I want you to pack your things and leave today. And you can be thankful I'm not filing a police report." "Mr. Vance, I can explain. I just wanted to open your eyes. This woman is manipulating you. Anyone can see it. You've changed. You've gone soft. I just wanted to show you she's no saint. You framed an innocent person for a crime, and you still think you're doing me a favor. Get out of my house now." Arnold left, but not before delivering one last venomous remark. "You'll see. She'll destroy everything you've built. Women like her know exactly how to do it." Arthur didn't respond. He just closed the door. But the episode shook him deeply, because he realized it wasn't just Arnold. It was a reflection of something larger, of an entire system of automatic distrust, of ingrained prejudices, of assumptions about who deserves credibility and who doesn't. Based on class origin and social standing, Sarah only found out about the incident days later when she noticed Arnold was no longer there. Arthur told her the whole truth, even showing her the recording. Sarah was silent for a long time after watching it. "He really thought I had stolen it," she said, her voice more sad than angry. "And you, sir, did you for even a second think it could be true?" "I won't lie, Sarah. For a few seconds the doubt crossed my mind. Because doubt always does. It's the habit of a lifetime. But those few seconds were enough for me to know that no, it was impossible. Because I know you, and I trust you." Sarah felt her eyes sting, but she held back the tears. "That means a lot, Mr. Vance, but it also scares me a little, because trust is a delicate thing, and I don't want to disappoint. You won't disappoint, and I won't put you in that position." But the truth was the closeness between them was becoming difficult to ignore. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something more subtle, more profound. It was the feeling of being seen by the other. Arthur felt seen not as the successful entrepreneur or the rich man, but as the flawed human trying to be better. Sarah felt seen not as the employee or the struggling single mother, but as a whole person, with dreams, fears, intelligence, and humor. The months passed. Arthur began to make more visible changes in his life. He reduced his workload, delegated more, and started getting involved with social projects for the first time. He sponsored a community daycare in the area where Sarah lived. He created a scholarship program for mothers who wanted to go back to school. He didn't make a fuss about it, didn't seek publicity. He just did it, motivated by something he couldn't fully name, but that had to do with wanting to be the version of himself he saw reflected in her eyes. Sarah changed too. She started dreaming again. She began a prep course for college entrance exams on Saturday nights when she could leave the boys with Julia. She enrolled her mother in a better health program, secured through contacts Arthur offered without her asking. Eleanor began to improve, coughing less, smiling more. Gabriel and Lucas gained a more stable routine, new school uniforms, complete sets of supplies. Small things that, to them, were worlds. But it wasn't all rosy. The cleaning company itself started to apply pressure. The manager called frequently, wanting to know why Sarah had left, making veiled comments about suspicious arrangements. Former colleagues began to treat her coldly when they met on the street, as if she had betrayed their class by accepting a permanent job in a mansion. Rumors were circulating, gossip about what exactly she was doing in that house to get so many perks. Julia remained worried. "Sarah, everyone's talking. They're saying you've become a rich man's mistress, that you're using the boys to get money, that you've forgotten where you came from. Julia, people will talk no matter what. If I was struggling, they'd say I was pitiful. Now that my life is improving, they say I'm a gold digger. You can't live your life trying to control what other people think." "But what if it's true? What if you're deluding yourself?" "It's not a delusion, Julia. It's a job. An honest job on the books with dignity. And if the boss is a good person, is that a problem?" "The problem is when you start confusing kindness with romantic interest. You're from completely different worlds. Sarah, this doesn't have a happy ending." Sarah knew her sister was partly right. Their worlds were indeed different, but she also knew that something was changing, and not just externally. Internally, she was allowing herself to occupy spaces she had once considered impossible. She was allowing herself to daydream, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager, and that was both liberating and terrifying. One afternoon in September, Arthur received a call that took him completely by surprise. It was Vincent Sterling, his former partner, the same one who had betrayed him 20 years ago, emptying their accounts and fleeing with investors. Vincent was back in the country, claimed to have changed and wanted to meet. Arthur spent days considering whether to accept. Part of him just wanted to tell Vincent to get lost. But another part, the part that was learning to give second chances, was curious. Did people really change? Wasn't he changing himself? Why couldn't Vincent have changed too? He told Sarah about the dilemma. They were on the terrace, she drinking juice during a work break, he drinking coffee as always. "Do you think you should see this person?" she asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe that everyone deserves a second chance, but another part thinks I'm being naive." Sarah was silent for a moment. "I think the question isn't whether he's changed or not. It's what you want. If you want to have that kind of person in your life again, even if he has changed, because not every second chance needs to be given. Forgiving is one thing, exposing yourself again is another." Arthur looked at her with a new expression. "You're very wise, you know that," Sarah laughed. "I'm not wise. I've just taken a lot of falls in life. You learn." Arthur decided to accept the meeting, but with caution. He scheduled it at a neutral coffee shop during the day for just 1 hour. Vincent showed up, older, with completely white hair, expensive but discreet clothes. He started with elaborate apologies, talked about how he had changed, about therapy, about maturing. And then he got to the point. He had a business proposal, an infrastructure venture with extremely high profit potential that just needed a partner with capital and a reputation. Someone like Arthur. Arthur listened to it all in silence. The proposal was indeed tempting. The numbers made sense. And there was the possibility of reviving an old ambition, a project to build bridges and viaducts that had always been his original dream in engineering. But there was a catch. This project would require total dedication, constant travel, and the reinvestment of all his liquid capital. It would mean abandoning the social projects he had started. It would mean returning to his previous way of life, focused exclusively on work and profit. "I'll think about it," Arthur said at the end. Vincent smiled, confident, as if he already knew the answer. In the following days, Arthur was visibly disturbed. Sarah noticed but didn't ask, until one morning he brought it up. "Do you remember that conversation about my ex-partner?" "I remember. He came back with a business proposal. A very good one, financially speaking. But it would change everything. I'd have to go back to working like before, 15 hours a day, constant travel. I'd have to stop the social projects, everything I've started to build." Sarah dried her hands on a dish towel and turned to face him. "And what do you want?" "I don't know. The proposal is tempting, and a part of me misses that adrenaline, that total focus. But I like who I've become now. I like having time to think, to be present. I like the projects I'm developing. I like the life I'm building." Sarah took a deep breath. "Then you already know the answer. You're just afraid to choose." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that choosing this new life means admitting the old one was empty. And nobody likes to admit that." Arthur was silent. She was right, as always. That night he called Vincent and declined the proposal. Vincent didn't hide his frustration, tried to argue, but Arthur was firm. When he hung up the phone, he felt a lightness he hadn't expected, as if he had passed a test he didn't even know he was taking. Sarah, on the other hand, was facing her own dilemmas. The feelings she had been trying to ignore were becoming impossible to deny. They weren't based on gratitude or material interest. They were based on genuine connection, on mutual admiration, on something that went beyond any simple classification. And that terrified her, because there was a distance between them that wasn't just social or economic. It was existential. Worlds that didn't easily touch, stories that didn't fit together without friction. She started arriving later and leaving earlier, creating physical distance as a form of emotional protection. Arthur noticed, but respected it. Until one day she arrived with a decision made. "Mr. Vance, I need to talk to you." "Go ahead." "I think it's time for me to leave. Not because of anything you've done wrong, but because I'm confusing things, and I can't afford to be confused. I have children. I have responsibilities. I can't risk my emotional stability for something that has no future." Arthur felt the ground disappear from under his feet, but something in her eyes stopped him from arguing immediately. There was pain there, but also determination. She was protecting herself in the only way she knew how, by pulling away before she got hurt too badly. "If that's what you want, I respect it," he said, his voice lower than usual. "But I want you to know that you're not confusing anything. I feel it too." Sarah closed her eyes for a second. "Don't say that. Please." "Why?" "Because it makes it harder to leave." "Then don't go." "I have to." "Mr. Vance, I'm 32 years old with 2 children, no college degree and a lifetime of bills to pay. You're 45 with a fortune, a social status. We don't live in the same world. And I don't want to be the story of the maid who fell in love with the rich boss. I want to be more than that. I deserve to be more than that." Arthur couldn't argue because, deep down, he understood. Sarah was right. She deserved to be more than a cliché, more than a footnote in someone's life. She deserved to be the protagonist of her own story. "How much notice do you need to give?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 2 weeks is fine." "Then work these 2 weeks. And on your last day, I want to give you a letter." "You don't need to give me a letter, Mr. Vance." "But I need to write it." Sarah nodded and left the room. Arthur stood there, alone in the enormous mansion, feeling the real weight of loneliness for the first time in many years. Not the superficial loneliness he had known before, but the deep loneliness of someone who had tasted true companionship and was now watching it walk away. And the worst part was knowing he could do nothing, because Sarah was right. She deserved to choose for herself, without pressure, without power imbalances, without anything but her own will. The 2 weeks of her notice period were the strangest Sarah and Arthur had ever experienced. They moved through the house like dancers who know the steps but pretend not to recognize each other. Sarah arrived punctually, did her work with the same competence as always, but there was a deliberate distance in every gesture. She no longer sat for coffee when he offered. She didn't converse beyond what was strictly necessary. Arthur respected her space, but each day of silence weighed like lead. He spent those 2 weeks writing and rewriting the letter he had promised to give her. There were dozens of versions, started and discarded. How could he put into words what he himself couldn't fully name? How could he express gratitude without sounding condescending? How could he express feeling without applying pressure? In the end, he opted for raw, unadorned honesty. On her last day, Sarah finished her cleaning earlier than usual. She put away the products for the last time, organized the cloths in their usual place, checked that all the faucets were tightly closed, all the light switches off. They were automatic gestures, but laden with farewell. Every room in that house had become familiar. Every corner held a small memory. There in the kitchen, she and Arthur had talked about the dreams she thought she had buried. There on the terrace, he had confessed his fear of never trusting anyone again. There in the hallway, they had laughed at something silly she couldn't even remember anymore. Arthur was waiting in the living room. He held a simple beige envelope with nothing written on the outside. "Sarah, before you go, I'd like you to read this," he said, extending the letter. "It doesn't have to be now. You can read it at home whenever you want, or never. The choice is yours." Sarah took the envelope and put it in her bag without opening it. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Vance, for the months of work, for the opportunity, for the trust. I'll never forget it." "I'm the one who should be thanking you, Sarah. You've changed my life in ways you can't even imagine, and I hope you find everything you deserve." They stood there for a moment that seemed frozen in time. There was so much to be said, and at the same time, nothing that could be said. Sarah gave a nod, turned, and walked out. She didn't look back. If she did, she knew she wouldn't be able to keep walking. Arthur remained in the empty living room, listening to her footsteps fade away, the electronic gate opening and closing. Then, only silence. That heavy, expensive silence he once hadn't even noticed, but which now seemed to scream the absence of something essential. Sarah read the letter that night after putting the boys to bed. She sat in her small kitchen with a cup of tea that grew cold without her noticing, and read every word 3 times. "Sarah, I don't know if you'll read this today, tomorrow, or ever, but I need to write it because there are things I couldn't say in person. You came into my life on an ordinary day, assigned by a company whose name I don't even remember, and you turned it upside down. Not in a dramatic or explosive way, but quietly, constantly, like water, shaping stone. I was a man convinced that trust was a weakness, that kindness was naivety, that the world was a cold place where only the clever survived. You didn't argue against any of these beliefs. You just lived differently. And living differently, I've discovered, is the most powerful argument there is. When I saw you refuse $100 that could have changed your week simply because it wasn't yours, something inside me broke. It was a small crack at first, but it grew, and today I realize that the person I was no longer exists. He has been replaced by a version that is still learning, that makes mistakes, but that at least tries. You said you deserve to be more than the story of the maid who fell in love with the rich boss. And you're right. You deserve to be the protagonist of your own story. You deserve someone who doesn't come with the weight of a social imbalance, with the burden of unasked-for favors, with the complication of different worlds. You deserve something clean, simple, honest. I will not pursue you. I will not show up where you are. I will not use my money or my contacts to make your life easier or harder. You are free to go, to grow, to be whoever you decide to be, and I will remain here, trying to be the person you taught me I could be. But I want you to know one thing. If ever, no matter when, you decide you want to talk, that you want to try something, that you just want a coffee and a chat about silly things, I will be here. Not as a boss, not as a savior, but as someone who admires you deeply and who would very much like to have you in his life in some way, whatever that may be. You were the mirror that made me see who I was, and I didn't like what I saw. but you were also the window that showed me who I could be. And that is a priceless gift. Take care of yourself. Take care of the boys, take care of your mother. And when you look in the mirror, remember that you are extraordinary. Not because you passed some stupid test a bitter man created, but because you choose to be good even when no one is watching. And that is the rarest and most valuable thing there is. With all my respect and admiration, Arthur. Sarah finished reading with moist eyes. She folded the letter carefully, put it in the drawer with her important documents, and allowed herself to cry. Not exactly from sadness, but from something more complex. It was relief mixed with loss, pride mixed with longing, certainty mixed with doubt. Julia, who was in the next room, heard her and came to check. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "Nothing, Julia, I'm just tired." "Are you sure you did the right thing leaving that place?" "No, but it was what needed to be done." The days turned into weeks. Sarah quickly found another job, going back to the same outsourced cleaning company she had worked for before. The pay was lower, there was no fixed contract, and she was back to the rotation of different houses each day. But there was an emotional security there that she needed. She didn't have to deal with confused feelings, with blurred lines between professional and personal, with the weight of being seen as something more than what she was. But life didn't go back to how it was before. Because Sarah was no longer who she was before. Her conversations with Arthur had expanded her way of thinking. The books he had recommended and she had borrowed had opened mental windows. The very experience of being treated with genuine respect had changed how she saw herself. She could no longer settle for bosses who barely looked her in the eye, who treated employees like invisible furniture. She could no longer accept prejudiced comments without speaking up. She could no longer be small in a world she had discovered was bigger than she had imagined. Arthur, for his part, threw himself into his work with a different kind of intensity. No longer the intensity of escape he had known before, but an intensity of purpose. He maintained all the social projects he had started, expanded some, created new ones. The daycare he sponsored in the Bronx was now serving 50 children. The scholarship program for single mothers had 15 beneficiaries in school. He started a project to renovate homes for low-income families, using his construction company's resources on weekends. But he did it all on a functional autopilot. He would arrive, execute, report, but without emotionally connecting to any of it. It was as if he were following a protocol, honoring a commitment but without truly feeling. The people around him noticed. His employees commented among themselves that the boss was more present but also more distant, more attentive but also more absent. Sarah heard about him from time to time. A colleague from the cleaning company worked at an event for his construction firm and mentioned seeing Mr. Vance, that he was thinner, more serious. One of the beneficiaries of the scholarship program, whom Sarah knew from her neighborhood, commented on the businessman who was funding her studies, always respectful, always discreet. Each piece of news was a poke in Sarah's chest, a reminder of something she had chosen to leave behind. It went on like this for 3 months, 3 months of established routines, of maintained distances, of lives that ran parallel without crossing. But parallel does not mean indifferent. Sarah often woke up thinking about him, wondering how he was, what he was doing. Arthur spent his nights on the terrace, drinking cold coffee, staring at his phone and resisting the urge to call. It was on a rare day off, a Sunday in December, that Sarah made a decision. She was at her mother's house. Eleanor had finally been permanently discharged and was much better. The boys were playing in the yard. Julia was making lunch. It was a normal, happy, simple family scene. But Sarah felt something was missing. Not something material, not comfort or money. A specific presence was missing. She missed talking about ideas, about books, about life. She missed that look that understood without judging. She missed him. "Mum," Sarah said suddenly, "I need to go somewhere." Eleanor, who knew her daughter better than anyone, just nodded. "Go, honey. Some conversations. You just have to have, even when they're scary." Sarah took 2 buses to the Upper East Side. It was noon on a Sunday. The neighborhood was quiet, the mansions closed up like fortresses of leisure. She stood in front of the gate to Arthur's house for long minutes, her finger hovering over the bell, her heart racing. What was she doing here? He had respected her space, hadn't contacted her once. Maybe he had moved on. Maybe there was someone else. Maybe she was about to make a fool of herself. But then she remembered her own words to him months ago. The question isn't what the other person wants, it's what you want. And she wanted this conversation. She wanted to understand what exactly she felt. She wanted to know if there was a possibility of something, or if it was just idealized longing. At the very least, she didn't want to spend the rest of her life wondering. She rang the bell, waited, nothing. She rang it again, still nothing. She was about to give up when the front door of the house opened and Arthur appeared. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair messy, his eyes sleepy as if he had just woken up. When he saw who it was, he stood completely still. Sarah. Hi. Sorry to show up like this, unannounced. I know I shouldn't have, but I needed to talk to you. Arthur opened the electronic gate without a word. Sarah walked in. They stood there in the front garden, in a silence heavy with accumulated unspoken things. Do you want to come in? He asked. Yes. They entered the living room. Everything was exactly as Sarah remembered, yet it seemed different. Emptier, perhaps, or maybe it was just her perception that had changed. Do you want coffee, juice, water? Arthur offered, clearly nervous. No, thank you, Arthur. I just need to talk. It was the first time she had called him by his first name, without the Mr. he noticed. I read your letter, Sarah began. I've read it several times, actually, and I've spent these last 3 months trying to convince myself I made the right choice by leaving, trying to focus on my work, the boys, my routine, trying to forget you. And did you succeed? No. And I realized something. I realized that I didn't miss the comfort of this house, the better salary, the stability. I missed you, the conversations, the shared silences, being seen as a whole person. And that scared me even more, because it meant it wasn't gratitude, it wasn't self-interest, it was genuine affection. Arthur sat down on the sofa, as if his legs could no longer hold him. Sarah, I haven't changed my mind about anything I wrote. But I can't lie either. These 3 months have been the worst I've lived through in a long time. Not because of physical loneliness, but because of a lack of meaning. As if I'd learned to breathe differently and suddenly the air became thin again. I didn't come here asking for anything, Sarah said, sitting in the armchair opposite him. I didn't come asking for returned feelings or promises of a future. I came because I realized that staying away for fear of getting hurt wasn't protecting me. It was just stopping me from living, and I'm tired of living in fear. What do you want, Sarah? Truly? I want to try. I don't know if it will work out. I don't know if we can overcome the differences in our worlds, our histories, our expectations, but I want to try. Not as your employee, not as someone you saved, but as an equal, as someone who admires you and wants to build something together, whatever that may be. Arthur was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. You know I want that too. I've wanted it for months. But I'm afraid that my money, my position, my resources will end up creating an unbalanced dynamic. I'm afraid you'll feel like you owe me something. I'm afraid of ruining what is most beautiful about you, which is that integrity, that strength that doesn't depend on anyone. Arthur, you won't ruin anything, because I won't let you. I'm not fragile, I'm not naive. I know very well who I am, where I come from, what I carry, and I also know what I want. I don't want you to be my savior. I want you to be my partner, someone to share the challenges, the victories, the silly things of everyday life with. Someone who sees me as a whole person, not as a project or a responsibility. And the boys, Eleanor, your family? They're your family? A part of me. They come with the territory. I'm not asking you to be an instant father or to take on responsibilities that aren't yours. But if you want to be in my life, they are part of that life. You can't separate them. I want to meet them. I want to be present. I don't know how to be a father. I've never had that experience, but I want to learn. Sarah felt her eyes sting. You really have changed, haven't you? I have. But it was you who taught me that change is possible, that we aren't prisoners of who we were, that we can choose differently at any moment. They sat there talking for hours. They didn't make grand promises or definitive plans. They just agreed to try, to go slowly, to build something at a pace that made sense for both of them. Sarah would not go back to working at the house, that was clear. She would continue on her own professional path, her own journey of growth. But they would be on that journey together, each with their own spaces, their own fears, their own stories, trying to build a new story that was theirs. When Sarah left, it was already late afternoon. Arthur walked her to the bus stop, but this time as a companion, not a boss. They walked side by side through the streets of the Upper East Side, talking about nonsense, laughing at silly things, just being two people who were really enjoying being together. "Next week is the end-of-year party at Gabriel's school," Sarah mentioned. "Do you want to come? Are you inviting me to meet your son?" "I am. But I should warn you, school parties are chaotic. Kids running everywhere, parents trying to control them, teacher yelling into a microphone. Sounds perfect." At the bus stop, before the bus arrived, Sarah turned to him. "Arthur, thank you for respecting my space these past few months. I know it was hard, but it was important. It made me sure of what I want." "And what do you want?" "You. The person you are, not what you have. The man who is trying to be better, not the successful entrepreneur. The flawed and real human being, not the polished image." Arthur smiled. A real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. "Then you'll have to deal with a lot of flaws. I'm terrible at remembering birthdays. I stay up too late. I get grumpy when I'm hungry. I have an obsession with organization that borders on a disorder. And I wake up in a bad mood. I'm stubborn when I think I'm right. I talk too loud when I get excited. And I have 2 sons who will test you every single day." "Sounds like we'll have a lot to negotiate." It does. The bus arrived. Sarah got on, but before she was fully inside, she looked back. "Next week, Saturday, 3 p.m., the Eleanor Roosevelt Public School in the Bronx. Don't be late." "I won't." The bus pulled away. Arthur stood there, watching the vehicle recede until it disappeared around a bend. Then he walked back home with a weight lifted from his chest. It wasn't a ready-made, packaged, happy ending. It was an uncertain beginning, full of challenges ahead, but it was real, and for the first time in a long time, real was exactly what he wanted. That night, Sarah told the boys that there was someone special they were going to meet on Saturday. Gabriel, ever suspicious, asked who it was. Lucas, ever curious, wanted to know if he liked soccer. Eleanor just smiled from the corner of the kitchen, happy to see her daughter allowing herself to daydream again. Julia called later, worried as always. "Sarah, are you sure about this?" "No, Julia. I'm not sure of anything, but I'm going to find out. And if it goes wrong, we'll get up and try again. That's how it's always been. And if it goes right, then we'll celebrate and keep going. That's also how it's always been." Saturday arrived. Arthur left his house early, more nervous than he had ever been before. Any business meeting? He stopped at a toy store, but then decided it was better not to bring anything to a first meeting, so it wouldn't seem like he was trying to buy affection. He drove, but parked 3 blocks away from the school to avoid drawing attention. He arrived 15 minutes early and waited at the entrance, watching the bustle of parents and children trying to spot Sarah in the crowd. When he saw her, he felt his heart race. She looked different, wearing a simple but beautiful dress, her hair down. Gabriel on one side, Lucas on the other, Eleanor right behind them. A complete, beautiful, real family. And he was about to be introduced to this family. Not as the rich boss, not as the benefactor, just as Arthur. Sarah saw him and waved. Gabriel tugged on her hand, suspicious. Lucas ran ahead, fearless. And Arthur, for the first time in many years, didn't feel fear either. He just felt a simple, profound certainty. He was exactly where he needed to be. The school party was exactly the chaos Sarah had predicted. Children darting between tables of sweets, parents trying to manage the collective euphoria, teachers with megaphones attempting to organize performances. Lucas ran straight to Arthur, with no ceremony at all, and started asking if he liked superheroes. Gabriel remained more reserved, observing from a distance with the natural suspicion of someone who had seen too many promises broken. Arthur crouched down to Lucas's level, talked about Spider-Man, about soccer, about a drawing the boy was making in school. He didn't force an approach with Gabriel, just gave a wave from afar, respecting the older boy's space. Eleanor watched everything with the wise eyes of someone who has lived a long time and recognizes character when she sees it. "You're the man my daughter worked for, aren't you?" she asked directly without beating around the bush. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Arthur. And now? Now I'm trying to get to know her family, if you'll allow me." "That depends. Are your intentions serious?" Arthur looked her in the eye. "They are. I don't know where this is going, Eleanor, but I know I want to be present. I want to do this right. I want to be respectful. And most of all, I want to make your daughter happy." Eleanor studied his face for a long moment. "You seem sincere. But sincerity isn't enough. You need consistency. My daughter and my grandsons have already suffered from people who made promises and then disappeared. If you're not sure, you'd better leave now." "I'm sure of what I feel. No one is sure about the future, but I'm sure that I want to try." "All right then, but I'll be watching." Sarah watched the conversation from a distance, her heart tight, but also proud. Her mother was being the guardian she had always been, and Arthur was being respectful without being subservient. It was a start. The afternoon passed quickly. Gabriel, after much observation, finally approached. "Do you know how to play video games?" he asked challengingly. "I'm terrible," Arthur admitted. "My reflexes aren't great, but I can learn." "Anyone can learn. You just have to practice," Gabriel replied, and for the first time he offered something close to a smile. At the end of the party, as it was getting dark, Sarah asked if he wanted to see the apartment where she lived. It was a question laden with meaning, an invitation to truly enter her life without filters, without idealizations. Arthur accepted. The apartment was small, 3 rooms, at the end of a cobblestone street in the Bronx. It had patches on the walls, old but clean furniture, and smelled of home cooking. It was the complete opposite of the mansion on the Upper East Side. And it was beautiful. Because it was alive, it was inhabited. It was full of photos stuck to the refrigerator, children's drawings hung with tape, clothes drying on a line in the tiny backyard. "It's small," Sarah said, a defensive note in her voice she couldn't hide. "It's perfect," Arthur replied, and it was true, because there was everything that truly mattered. Love, memory, history, struggle. There was her truth, unmasked. The following months were a slow construction. Arthur didn't try to rush anything. He visited on weekends, always arranged in advance, always respecting the boys' schedules. He took Gabriel to play soccer at the neighborhood court, despite being terrible at it and constantly being outmaneuvered by the local kids. He sat with Lucas to build with Legos, with infinite patience for the crazy projects the boy invented. He talked with Eleanor about life, about the past, about plants, discovering she had a wisdom about medicinal herbs that he found fascinating. With Sarah, the relationship evolved without hurry. They talked a lot about everything, about politics, about religion, about musical tastes, about childhood fears, about future dreams. They discovered they disagreed on many things, but that disagreement wasn't a problem when there was respect. They also discovered a physical connection that was unhurried, that grew at the natural pace of people building something to last. Sarah enrolled for the college entrance exam to study education. She passed. She started at a public university, studying at night after work. Arthur offered to pay for a private college with better hours, but she refused. "I need to do it my way," she explained. "I need to know I earned it myself." He understood and offered only help with books, transportation on exam days, and looking after the boys when she needed to study. Help that didn't infringe on her autonomy, but simply eased her path. Arthur's social projects continued to grow. The daycare became a benchmark in the area. The scholarship program expanded. He created partnerships with universities to offer free vocational courses. And he made a point of visiting personally, of knowing each story, of understanding each reality. Sarah went with him when she could, and together they formed an interesting team. He with the business acumen to structure projects, she with the sensitivity of someone who understood the real needs from the inside. Gabriel and Lucas gradually opened up, Gabriel stopped asking when Arthur was leaving and started asking when he was coming back. Lucas started calling him Uncle Artie, a nickname that emerged naturally and that Arthur embraced with pride. One night, Gabriel asked a tough question. "Uncle Artie, are you going to marry my mom?" Arthur was helping the boy with his math homework. He stopped, put down the pencil, and looked at the boy seriously. "I would like that very much, Gabriel, but that's a decision your mom has to make too. And you boys, because if I marry her, the three of you come along. It's a complete package, and I need to know if you want that. What if we don't? Then I'll respect that. I'll be sad, but I'll respect it. Because I love your mom, but I also respect her. And I respect you." Gabriel was silent for a long moment. "I think I do want it, but I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that you'll leave, that you'll get fed up with us, that we won't be good enough." Arthur felt his heart ache. "Gabriel, I'm not going anywhere. Not because you're perfect, nobody is, but because I chose to be here. And choosing means staying, on the good days and the bad days. Like when Lucas broke your phone by accident and you didn't even get mad. Like that. Okay, then you can marry her. But you have to ask properly, with a ring and everything. She deserves it." A year after they reconnected at the school party, Arthur bought a ring. It wasn't the most expensive one in the jewelry store, but it was meaningful. Simple gold with 3 small stones representing the 3 who were already part of the family. He proposed to Sarah on an ordinary Sunday in her kitchen with the boys as witnesses and Eleanor crying quietly in the corner. Sarah said yes, not because he had money, not because he offered material security, but because he was present. He was constant. He was true. Because on the days she came home tired from college, he was there with a prepared meal. Because when Eleanor had a respiratory relapse, he found the best doctors, but without taking away the family's decision-making autonomy. Because when Gabriel got a bad grade and was devastated, Arthur sat with him all night helping him catch up. Because when Lucas had nightmares for a week straight, Arthur was the one who stayed up at night telling stories until he fell asleep again. The wedding was simple. At City Hall, with Sarah's family present, a few close friends, and the team from the social projects they managed together. Sarah wore a simple white dress she had chosen herself from a downtown store. Arthur wore a suit, but took off the tie because it was hot. Gabriel and Lucas were the official ring bearers, in tiny suits that made them look like miniature adults. After the ceremony, they had a party at the neighborhood court where Sarah grew up. A community barbecue, live music from a local band, kids running wild. Arthur danced awkwardly, stepped on Sarah's foot 3 times, laughed at himself, and was embraced by neighbors he barely knew, but who welcomed him because he had chosen to be a part of their world. They didn't move into the mansion on the Upper East Side. Arthur had other ideas. He bought a medium-sized house in a middle-class neighborhood, neither the outer boroughs nor the wealthy center. A house where they could all fit comfortably, but that didn't create an absurd distance from the world Sarah knew. It was a house with a backyard for the children to play in, a ground-floor room adapted for Eleanor, and an office where they could both work on projects together. "This house is ours," he said on the day they signed the deed. "It's not my house where you live, it's our house, it's in the family's name." Sarah cried, not from sadness but from something akin to arrival, as if she were finally truly home, not just inhabiting a space but belonging to it. A routine was established. Sarah continued studying education, now in her 3rd year. She started volunteering as a teacher at the daycare Arthur sponsored, discovering a natural calling for working with young children. Arthur further reduced his workload at the construction firm, delegating operational management to trusted partners and focusing only on strategic decisions. He began dedicating half his time to social projects, the other half to his family. The boys grew up. Gabriel became a teenager, with all the challenges that entailed. He started questioning authority, testing limits, slamming his bedroom door. Arthur and Sarah navigated these turbulent waters together, sometimes disagreeing on the best approach, but always realigning after talking it through. Lucas developed a talent for drawing, spending hours creating wild comic books. Arthur bought him professional supplies, encouraged him, but without pressure for it to become a career. Eleanor became a constant and beloved presence. She tended the garden, cooked recipes she kept in her memory, and was the voice of experience when the adults got lost in arguments. She and Arthur developed a mutual affection, based on genuine respect and admiration. It was on a March afternoon, 2 years after the wedding, that Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She was 36, and they hadn't been planning more children, but life has its own plans. When she took the test and saw the positive result, she froze in shock. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the awareness of the weight of it all. A child that would be theirs together, that would represent the definitive union of two worlds. She told Arthur that night. He was reading on the sofa. When she came in with the test in her hand, unable to speak, just showing it to him. Arthur looked at the object, looked at her, and started to cry. It wasn't a cry of shock or fear. It was a cry of something much bigger, something he never imagined he could feel. "Sarah, am I going to be a father?" "You are. We're going to have a child of our own." They hugged right there, crying together. They weren't just crying for the baby to come, but for everything it represented. They cried for the path they had traveled, for the choices they had made, for the fears they had faced. They cried for the beauty of having come this far, of having built something real and true against all odds. Gabriel and Lucas reacted with enthusiasm, mixed with preemptive jealousy. "Are you going to like the baby more than us?" Lucas asked, direct as always. "Impossible," Arthur replied. "I love you both in a way I didn't even know existed. The baby won't take anything away from that. It will just add more love. It's like your heart grows bigger to fit more in. But what if it grows crooked and gets deformed?" Lucas insisted, with that bizarre childhood logic. "Then we'll get some glue and fix it," Arthur joked, and they all laughed. The pregnancy was smooth. Sarah continued her studies, now in her final year of college. Arthur went to every prenatal appointment, learned complicated medical terms, assembled a crib, painted a nursery, doing things men of his generation rarely did. Not out of obligation, but because he wanted to be present for every detail. Sarah graduated with her degree in education when she was 8 months pregnant. The commencement ceremony was on a hot December night. Arthur was in the front row next to a formally dressed Gabriel and Lucas, with Eleanor holding a bouquet of flowers and Julia snapping photos non-stop. When they called the name Marina Costa Villela, the entire family stood up and applauded on their feet, unashamed of the commotion they were causing. Sarah walked onto the stage with her huge belly, took the diploma with both hands, and looked at that paper with moist eyes. It was just a piece of letterhead, but it represented years of deferred dreams, of nights spent studying after an exhausting day of work, of exams taken with pregnancy backaches, of papers turned in while Gabriel complained about needing help with homework, and Lucas demanded attention. It represented resistance, persistence, choice. The baby was born in February, in the intense heat of a New York summer. It was a natural birth, and Arthur was in the room from start to finish, holding Sarah's hand, crying openly when he heard the first cry. It was a girl, small, red, perfect. They named her Helena, in honor of Arthur's paternal grandmother, whom he had barely known but whose stories of strength had always marked him. The first few months were as chaotic as they always are with a newborn. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, crying for no apparent reason, but they were chaotic together. Arthur took on some of the nighttime duties, giving a bottle in the middle of the night while Sarah recovered her energy, changing diapers with a skill he didn't know he had. Gabriel and Lucas took turns being helpers, Lucas humming strange songs to get Helena to stop crying, Gabriel rocking the crib with a surprising gentleness for someone who was always slamming doors. It was during one of those late nights, with Helena, finally asleep after an hour of crying, and Sarah and Arthur exhausted on the sofa, that he said, "Do you remember the day we met?" "How could I forget? You had money scattered around the house to test if I would steal." I was such a cynical man, so convinced that everyone was dishonest, that kindness was a mask. And now I know I was wrong. Not about everyone, There are still bad people in the world. But I was wrong to assume everyone was bad. I was wrong to protect myself so much that I stopped living. Sarah rested, her head on his shoulder. And I was wrong too. I thought accepting help was a weakness, that needing someone meant losing my independence. It took me a long time to understand that interdependence isn't the same as dependence, that we can need each other and still be whole. You taught me how to trust again, and you taught me that I deserved to be seen, not as a victim, not as a heroic fighter, just as a person, complex, flawed, real. They sat there in silence, listening to Helena's soft breathing from the nearby crib, Lucas's quiet snores from the back room, Gabriel turning over in his bed across the hall, Eleanor coming down for a glass of water in the kitchen. The sounds of a living, inhabited, loved home. "Arthur," Sarah said suddenly, "do you regret anything?" He thought for a long moment. "I regret the years I wasted thinking that suspicion was wisdom, but I don't regret the path that brought me here, because it was that path, with all its mistakes, that made me value all of this. If I had been different before, maybe I wouldn't have recognized the treasure when it appeared." That was a good answer. I learned from a wise person. Who? You. Sarah laughed softly so as not to wake Helena. "I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn and lucky. You're extraordinary. And I'm the luckiest man in the world that you decided to give a chance to a reformed cynic." The years passed. Gabriel finished high school and, to everyone's surprise, decided to study engineering in college. "I learned from both of you that you can build things that last," he explained. Lucas went to art school, pursuing his dream of becoming a professional comic book artist. Helena grew up in an environment where love was never lacking, but where responsibility and values were also taught from an early age. Sarah opened a small community school, using her degree in education and Arthur's financial and structural support. It was a school for low-income children, with an innovative methodology that focused on emotional education alongside traditional academics. It became a benchmark in the region within 5 years. Arthur sold the mansion on the Upper East Side. It simply made no sense to keep that enormous space he had never truly inhabited. With the money from the sale, he created a permanent fund for the social projects, ensuring they would continue to operate regardless of his presence. Eleanor lived to see her grandchildren grow up, to meet her great-granddaughter Helena, to witness the complete transformation of that family that had started in pieces and was stitched together with patience and love. She passed away in her sleep on a quiet autumn night, at the age of 83, after an ordinary day where she had complained about her soap opera, played cards with Helena, and told Sarah how proud she was of the woman her daughter had become. At the funeral, Sarah didn't cry much. She was sure her mother had departed happy, complete, knowing she was leaving her family well-structured, loved, and cared for. "She fulfilled her mission," Sarah told Arthur. "She taught us that dignity is worth more than money, that honesty isn't naivety, that you can be poor in resources but rich in character," and she was right. Arthur and Sarah grew old together, something neither of them had imagined possible on that first day when she found money scattered around the mansion, and he watched her through the cameras, expecting yet another confirmation of his cynical theory about humanity. They grew old with wrinkles that came from laughing together, with white hair that appeared while raising children, with bodies that changed but still recognized each other in the dark. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sarah gave Arthur an unusual gift, the photo she had taken on her first day of work, that image of the 2 $50 bills on the marbled countertop. She had kept it on her phone all that time, never deleting it. "Why did you keep this?" Arthur asked, looking at the faded image. "Because it was the moment that defined everything. The moment I chose to be who I am, even when no one was watching. And you were watching, but I didn't know. And it was precisely because I didn't know that it was real." Arthur studied the photo for a long time. "I look at this and see the pathetic man I was, suspicious, testing people as if they were lab rats. I look at it and see the beginning of something beautiful, because you could have seen me pass the test and simply gone on with your life, satisfied with your hypothesis. But you did something different. You let it transform you and form That's rarer than passing a test of honesty. We were both transformed, Sarah. You taught me to trust. I taught you that you deserve to be cared for without losing your strength. It was an exchange. It was a construction, brick by brick, choice by choice. They kept the framed photo not in the living room but in their bedroom, where only they could see it. A private reminder of where they started and how far they had come. A reminder that transformation is not a single event, but a constant process of choosing differently, choosing better, choosing love even, when fear would be easier. Helena grew up hearing the story of how her parents met, the children's version at first, then the full version as she matured. "Dad used to test people?" she asked one day at age 12, with the typical moral indignation of her age. "He did," Arthur admitted without hiding it. "It was a wrong thing I did, because I was afraid to trust." "And Mom passed the test?" "Your mother passed without even knowing she was being tested, and more importantly, she taught me that the test itself was wrong, that assuming the worst in people is a form of cowardice." "Did you really change?" "I did, and I'm still changing. Your Uncle Gabriel taught me patience. Your Uncle Lucas taught me that creativity matters as much as logic. You are teaching me that hard questions deserve honest answers. And your mother continues to teach me every day that love is a verb, not a noun. It's constant action, not a static feeling." Helena thought about this. "So, your story is about change. It's about choice. Every day, we choose again. To choose trust, to choose honesty, to choose presence, to choose love. The big choices matter, but it's the small daily choices that truly build a life." Years later, when Gabriel married a woman he met in college, he asked Arthur to be his best man. "You're not my biological father," Gabriel said, "but you're the father who chose to be present, and that's worth more." Arthur cried through the entire wedding without any shame. When Lucas sold his first comic book to a major publisher, he dedicated the book to Sarah and Arthur. "To my mother, who taught me that dreams are worth fighting for, and to my father of the heart, who taught me that supporting others' dreams is as important as chasing your own." When Helena graduated with a degree in psychology, she decided to work in therapy for low-income families. "I learned at home," she explained, "that transformation happens in spaces of listening, of respect, of love that doesn't depend on performance. I want to help other families discover that." Sarah and Arthur reached their 60s and renewed their vows in a simple ceremony, at the same neighborhood court where they had celebrated their original wedding. They were surrounded by people who loved them, by projects that continued to transform lives, by children who had chosen good and meaningful paths. It wasn't a perfect life. They had problems, arguments, bad days, but it was a real life, built on conscious choices, on hard-won love, on respect maintained even in difficult times. "If you could go back in time," Sarah asked that night after the renewal, "and talk to the person you were on the day of the test, what would you say?" Arthur thought. "I would tell him to let go of the suspicion. I'd tell him he's going to meet someone who will turn his world upside down in the best possible way. I'd tell him not to be afraid to change because change is scary, but stagnation kills you slowly. And I'd tell him that true wealth isn't what he has accumulated in the bank, but what he will build with his own hands, brick by brick, choice by choice, day after day." "And you?" he asked in return. "I would tell that tired woman, cleaning a mansion and thinking only of surviving the next day, that she is stronger than she imagines, that she will find love, she will get an education, she will build a family, she will achieve her dreams. But most of all, I would tell her that she is already enough. She doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. She just needs to keep being who she is, doing the right thing when no one is watching, because that's how you build a foundation that lasts." They stood there, hands intertwined, looking at the horizon where New York was lighting up, a big city where two unlikely lives had met, recognized each other, and chosen each other, and chose again, and again, and again, because in the end, what began as a cynical test of human dishonesty transformed into the greatest lesson on what truly matters. Trust is not naivety when based on real knowledge. Love is not weakness when built with mutual respect. Change is not impossible when there is genuine will. and true wealth was never in what one could buy, but in what one is capable of building when one chooses every day to be better than they were yesterday. The transformation of Arthur and Sarah did not happen in a single dramatic moment of revelation. It happened in the small daily decisions to choose differently, in the courage to trust despite fear, in the strength to remain whole even when no one was watching, and most importantly, in the wisdom to recognize that no one builds anything alone, that we are all interdependent, that we need each other not because we are weak, but because we are human. And so a story that began with suspicion, testing, and distance ended with trust, partnership, and love, not because it was easy, but because it was chosen. Day after day, brick by brick, choice by choice.